Alright guys, BLM here, back with a new video, and in this video, I'll be doing a review of the Big Brother holiday special season, and that is Big Brother Reindeer Games, where obviously this review is a bit late here. Obviously just the end of last month when the season finished was just so jam-packed to where I didn't have the time to make this video until now, though I would be very remiss if I never got the opportunity to talk about Reindeer Games, considering it was somehow good. Way better than I could have ever anticipated it to be, to where while this show does still have this like over-the-top Christmas aesthetic, and is one that is almost entirely focused around challenges, it shockingly ends up actually being good, with mostly equitable comps, a fantastic cast, and enough social strategy there to where I feel like there is an essence of this season that felt like a mini Legend season. Obviously not as satisfying as it would have been if we just straight up got a Big Brother season with this cast, though considering that this was a throwaway Christmas special made to just fill out the time slots that were empty due to the strikes, I mean, this ends up obviously being way better than it has any right to be. So today I'm going to talk about my detailed thoughts on the season, running through the season from beginning to end, where let's start off with the premiere, where the season starts off with Santa, aka the Big Brother announcer guy, reading a book about BB Legend saving the Christmas season, which essentially ends up being the framed story for this season, with him also talking about having created the multiverse from BB25, because I guess they care enough to continue with that plot thread, even though it's never mentioned ever again. And with that also being followed up by an animated intro sequence, I was really just thinking at the beginning of this, what am I watching? Where, again, this did not give off the best impression of the show right away, but thankfully what followed this was actually really fun, where it was a lot of fun to just see this cast that, with the exception of one, I would quantify as worthy enough to be looked at as Big Brother legends, interacting here and playing a game that has some social strategy components to it. And again, just the notion of us getting to see them again in a social strategy setting was already a surprise to me after the initial announcement, where straight up coming into the season, I was fully just expecting them to spend most of their time in the backyard just doing challenge after challenge after challenge. While later episodes do essentially do that, there were still strategic decisions to be made here and social dynamics in play, which again just shocked me at that being the case on a season like this. Now, obviously a major reason why they were able to get a cast this strong here is due to the overall filming schedule of the season, where obviously it would have been tough to get these bigger names for a normal season, but this season ended up being filmed over the course of a week, with players not even living in the Big Brother house, instead just spending a few hours there a day to film the show with no live feed component to it. That probably made it easier for these people to agree to do it. And while obviously again it was disappointing that we got a cast this great just to not get a proper Big Brother experience with them, and instead they're used to just make this random holiday special that does strip away a lot of the fundamentals of Big Brother, again, the season ends up being extremely strong considering the context around it. But here we do get introduced to the cast one by one, with them getting teleported into the HOH room, aka Santa's office, with festive clothing on, where they all get to talk about their previous Big Brother experiences, along with how much they love Christmas, because obviously. But we do see Taylor being the first to enter here, which was an interesting choice for the show, with her obviously being an outspoken critic of Big Brother challenges. Obviously it was cool to see her back here, and with there being a social strategy component to the show as well, I do feel like this season actually made me understand Taylor better as a player. And along with that, we also get to see this more like villainous side of her, with her playing up this persona in the DR that she wasn't really able to play in BB24 just due to the other circumstances surrounding her, to where again it felt like a more genuine portrayal of Taylor here, what we would expect to see Taylor act like if she were to return on future seasons. Next up we get to see Cody Calafiore enter, who typically I do find him to be pretty boring, though I will say I do think he actually played a pretty decent role on this season, where I actually kind of found him kind of fun to watch, due to the fact that he was this big target from the very beginning, where instantly we see Taylor having reservations about him, being worried that he's going to bro down, and considering this is a show about challenges, and to be one of the best comp competitors in Big Brother history, and obviously put a massive target on his back here, to where I don't really feel like he had much of a chance coming into this, unless he were just to outright win out. But again, through that, I do feel like we got the most entertaining version of him that we've seen on TV so far. We then get to see Brittany enter. Another interesting choice for a show here that was revolved around challenges, but she still ends up being pretty incredible TV with it. Seeming like she really hasn't missed a step entertainment-wise, with her being such a highlight on this season, bringing some really great DRs and humorous moments along the way. We also get to see Xavier enter, with us seeing an instant connection between him and Taylor that leads to a really interesting dynamic between them as the season progresses. And like Cody, it was interesting to see Xavier have the play from the bottom on this season after kind of being handed a majority alliance the last time around. But then we get to probably my favorite casting choice of this cast here, and that being the return of Danielle Reyes, who was just cool to see here, and seeing her play up this massive villain role in the DR as well was just so cool to see in the year 2023. And while at the end of the day, I was kind of underwhelmed with the fact that she does get one of the quieter edits on the board, it again was just kind of cool to see her interact with like X and Taylor, these two players that obviously cited her as their inspirations coming into their seasons, or like just from a legacy perspective. This was just so cool to see. We then get to see Frankie enter the house, where obviously a lot of people were not particularly excited to see him on this season, though I personally felt like he was kind of the perfect fit for a show like this, one that is obviously as campy as it's trying to be, where I feel like Frankie kind of perfectly fits in this cast as someone that's willing to play ball with a lot of the more dumb aspects of the show here, while also obviously just being very good at competitions. And we do see him reconnect with Cody here, with them being ride or dies from the beginning. But obviously the more interesting connection to Cody comes from the next person who enters the house, that being Nicole Franzel, who obviously has a very rocky history of Cody now, to where I did feel like their storyline coming into this season was one of the more interesting ones on the board, which did end up paying some pretty fun dividends in this first episode, though really not much beyond that. Obviously, Nicole ends up being one of the bigger surprises on this season, and I think really comes out of this season probably being the person that has the biggest reputation change, with her seeming to own her villainy at points on this season and just outright just comes off as mostly likable. Next up, we end up seeing Josh enter, who has a kind of similar trajectory, where, I mean, to be fair, right away, he doesn't give off the best impression, where he comes off banging pots and pans as you would expect him to, which I will also mention the fact that just seeing Danielle Reyes dancing around to that was just so surreal to see. But anyway, again, like, you know, obviously Josh was someone that was not particularly popular coming into this season, but again, I think he largely came off as likable as well here, where obviously he still hams it up for the camera, but again, not getting to the point where he comes off as extremely annoying to me, to where I think it mostly came off as endearing instead. But then we get to see the final player enter the house, saving the best for last. We get Cameron from BB25, which, again, I really didn't want him to be on this season, or really just kind of a creep on BB25, but obviously we knew he was going to be here, and really, I mean, considering that fact, his run on this season ends up going off pretty much as well as I would have wanted it to go. But eventually we see the players gather in the living room, where we are told that Christmas is in danger of being canceled, and the players need to participate in games to fix things on the North Pole, where for some reason within that, people will get eliminated every round until there's a final four where they'll participate in the titular reindeer games. Because any of this makes sense, I guess. Obviously, it felt like production felt the need to contextualize a lot of these challenges, but obviously the story around all this is really stupid, but obviously you're not supposed to be taking it that seriously. And like, straight up, how could you take this that seriously? But it is funny to see the players themselves really buying into this and trying to like sell it with their really fake reactions here. But obviously this does end up giving us the format of the show, again being entirely based on challenges, which in itself is not entirely dissimilar to something like buddy games, which I would not be shocked that that was the initial basis of this format, to make a Big Brother holiday version of buddy games. But in this show, every episode will have the players participate in a naughty and nice challenge, aka a mostly pointless challenge that just gives someone an advantage in the following challenge, and also the power to give someone else a disadvantage, where again this challenge was just mostly pointless in the grand scheme of things, very rarely changing the results of the following game, and if it did, it didn't play out as it intended to. Though in just having this exist on the show, it does just inherently add social strategy aspects to the game, adding this purpose to creating alliances to avoid getting the disadvantage, which was already a sign that this show is headed in the right direction. The main challenge of each episode is the Jingle Bell Brawl, aka essentially just a daily or a main match, to where the winner of that challenge will be safe, while the result of that challenge will also play a factor in deciding who goes into the elimination, aka Santa Santa Showdown, which obviously the loser of that challenge will end up going home. Again, a format not that dissimilar from what we've seen on shows in the past, though what does make this show excel here is the fact that the challenges themselves end up actually being pretty equitable and adding social strategy aspects to the challenges themselves, which ends up really enhancing the show beyond the more typical boring physical challenges that I expected this show to be comprised of. Though something I didn't love was the inconsistency of the format at points, where it does constantly end up changing, with literally every single episode having a different format to it, and through the players not being told about that format beforehand most of the time, I do think it leads to the players not being given that much room to play their fullest. Obviously, again, you can't really make these optimal decisions when you don't really know what the ramifications of that decision will be. And through that, I do think it made it a bit tough to really assess when people were making the right moves for their games. But here we do end up seeing some alliance building early on, which, again, the fact that we even got this on Reindeer Games and got to see the game move as quickly as it did as well, where, again, like each round has an extremely fast pace due to the entire round of gameplay taking place over just a few hours. It really led to all this just being pretty insane to see here, to where we do instantly see Taylor and Josh working together and pulling in Xavier and Danielle into a Final Four deal, which instantly gets focus on the show, even though it never really seemed like this was that real of an alliance to anyone outside of Xavier, with Danielle even claiming here that she's willing to cut them loose and again gets this villainous content, despite the fact that down the road this show tries to portray this as a real thing, even though again like it never really seemed like it was. But again, just seeing like this grouping of players coming together and interacting was just so surreal. And feeling like this sort of content was the type of thing we would see on a Legends season, to where, while again the format of the show is obviously not ideal, I do find interactions like this to be already worth the price of admission of watching the show. But here we do end up seeing BB16 being instantly targeted, considering a third of this cast ends up coming from that season, along the fact that we do see a lot of talk about having to target the challenge beasts, which right away seems to put a massive target on Cody's back here, with him falling into both camps and not being that particularly well connected to this cast, and mixing that with the fact that he has this rocky relationship with Nicole. Again, it's not a good spot for him to be in, though we do end up seeing his closest connection here being with Frankie, with them obviously having remained friends after BB16, which in itself ends up saving Cody during this round, though again, it was interesting to see Cody have to play from the bottom during this season, to where while it doesn't necessarily play out particularly well for him, I also don't feel like he played particularly poorly either, considering the position he was coming into. Though again, it was still refreshing to see these big comp threats being targeted and going out early on in this season. Again, after the frustration that stemmed from BB25, this season just felt like a massive palate cleanser from that season due to that. Anyway, we eventually get the first elf ambassador entering the house, aka former players that came back here to host comps, with the first of these being Jordan Lloyd, who is not good as a host, humorously struggling with even reading her basic script, but still again cool to see returning players being used in this way, though again probably would have been better if we just got a better host than Jordan. This does lead to our first Naughty or Nice challenge, which will end up being these smaller scale challenges taking place within the house and shockingly being equitable, which again, with this being the first taste of competitions on this season, it was just mind-blowing to see most of these challenges not be inherently physical. But the challenge here is very reminiscent to that of the veto Allison won in BB4, or the challenge that Boogie won to get the coup d'etat in BB7, this challenge with the players getting clues around the house and having to guess the correct answer, the answer here being a Christmas Carol, which again, anyone really could have won this here. And we do get some interesting moments from this, with Xavier instantly guessing Grandma got ran over by a reindeer. We have Josh guessing Feliz Navidad, even though there's nothing to do with any of that, any of the clues. But here we do have seeing Brittany and Danielle working together during this challenge, which again could have been such an iconic duo to see run this season, though obviously doesn't play out particularly well for them in the long term. But here we do see Brittany being the first to get it right, to which I should mention the frame narrative of this challenge, which was to solve the riddle so that the hottest DJ in the North Pole can play the song for some reason, playing into this gimmick that the Naughty and Nice challenges have, where they all culminate in this musical performance of some kind, and don't get why. I don't know if this was a mandate from CBS. They were like, hey, it's a Christmas special, you gotta have music at some point. But again, all this was very strange. But with this this win, Brittany now gets to figure out what the Naughty and Nice power is, because again, they didn't tell them beforehand, which in itself, the question mark of what exactly this power is did seem to lead to a lot of people throwing this challenge. And straight up, this was one that was probably not worth winning anyway, as Brittany here gets an advantage in the next challenge that was very marginal and doesn't help her really anyway, but also ends up having to give out a disadvantage, in turn essentially blatantly targeting someone, which is a similar downside to like the first HOH. But what makes this even worse is that one, here you do have to target one person, meaning that you can't really even lie and say that, oh, you were using them as a pawn or something to that nature. And also you have no real ability to guarantee that that person leaves the game either, to where if this person proceeds to win a later comp and stays in the game, it puts you in a lot of danger there of a massive target now on your back with someone knowing that you're directly coming for them. Where I really feel like this does a lot more harm to Brittany's game than anything. And it does lead to her finally complaining about this in the DR, being incredulous at the fact that this didn't at least give her safety, and her talking about wanting a word with Santa being one of many times she ends up complaining about him on this season. We do end up seeing Brittany trying to make the most of it here, to where she ends up trying to pick a consensus target here, getting the women together and repairing her relationship with Nicole, which we do see them strangely talking about some social media drama that was there between the two after BB22 that led to them having a fractured relationship, which doesn't properly get explained here, though I would assume it had something to do with Janelle. And like strip, I also kind of completely forgot they were both on The Amazing Race together at a point. Surprisingly, they ended up actually repairing their relationship here and ended up pretty much working in lockstep after they squashed their beef here. But here we do end up seeing Brittany doing one-on-ones with all the guys, talking up Josh as this big threat, despite the fact that, again, it's Josh. Now, obviously, yes, he is in good shape now from training for a challenge, but again, he's still Josh. So I found it funny that they went out of their way to prop him up as a threat here, especially considering he does end up being pretty lackluster in challenges. But we also get some pretty fun content from her convo with X, talking about how all he's doing is serving air and having no substance. Really a complaint of his OG game as well, and that the people that he would talk to outside of his core alliance were not really trusting him just due to how little he would give them. But this does lead to probably one of the funniest moments of the entire season, of Brittany genuinely not knowing that he won his season and being shocked when she found out that fact. But anyway, we do end up seeing Taylor putting in some pretty good work here in trying to save X with her about wanting to use him as a weapon in the game, which she constantly reiterates as the season goes along. And while obviously he was a very loyal ally to her, I do feel like her openly attaching herself to him was probably not ideal gameplay here, but really the choice does come down to Cody or Cam, with Cam being the easy person to pick here, as he really has no one in the game and is the new kid on the block. But through that, there's also this potential to win him over here, where if Brittany doesn't give him the disadvantage, there's a good chance that she's able to pick him up as a number. So we're considering the fact that most of the rest of the cast seem to also be on board with targeting Cody anyway. It makes more sense that we go with that route, though it obviously ends up putting a bigger bullseye on Brittany's back here for Cody in particular, as it makes it very clear that she wants him out. Where I do think strategically, I think there definitely is the argument that even despite the potential of potentially picking up Cameron, that you should still put up Cameron here, as again, he has really no other options anyway, and at least here you can just use the excuse that he's the newbie, so he was the easy person to disadvantage. But we do get a funny moment following this of everyone starting to give each other these awkward hugs that obviously would typically be done after nomination ceremonies, only for Cody to openly say, we don't need to do this, which again is funny to see them poking fun at the OG show tropes here. This does lead to us getting to the Jingle Bell Brawl, where we do get the reveal that the winner of this challenge will essentially be an HOH, getting to nominate two people to be thrown into Santa's Showdown, which again, seeing this here made me really excited, to where it felt very reminiscent to just the format of OG Big Brother, just being eliminated in a different way. Where again, seeing this was exciting to me here, getting closer and closer to the OG Big Brother format, though again, this format doesn't really stay consistent following this, which I was actually underwhelmed by. Now, the challenge itself here does end up having some physical aspects to it, to where you do have to go back and forth, crossing a balance beam and delivering letters, but again, they do end up doing something to make this competition a little bit more balanced here, that being them adding in social strategy aspects to this challenge. For the goal here is to empty your mailbox, so every single time you cross the beam, you have to put a letter of your own into someone else's box, which again, normally I actually don't like these sort of mechanics in a challenge that divvies out immunity. It really just empowers the majority, but in a game like this, that is again so focused around challenges, I do feel like this actually kind of works to the show's favor by again not allowing whoever is the most physical to just outright win everything. And just straight up, this challenge also just ends up being fun TV anyway, to where seeing everybody have to essentially expose their cards in the process of the challenge was really fun to see. And again, it's a challenge that could have very easily just been dominated by Cody. To where even with his disadvantage here, he's in the massive lead. It was obviously harmed by how many letters he has to return, to where he doesn't win there. And like initially, we also see Cameron being fully loaded up as well. Again, the easy person to target, though we do also see some people going for Cody, enough to make him not win, with Taylor coming after him here, starting their feud, while also having him and Nicole go back and forth, which was fun to see this storyline from a previous season paying dividends here, and it probably leading to what is probably my favorite Cody moment in his entire Big Brother career, of Nicole whining to him after he puts a letter in her box, only for us to then cut to the DR of him mocking her voice in that instance, which was funny. And at the same time, we have Nicole seemingly playing into her villain role here, where we do see her laughing and taking glee at the moment that Cody takes a pretty hard fall. But here we do end up seeing Frankie utilizing the optimal strat of divvying out the letters equally, and through that you're not going to get any letters on yourself. That is until we see X and Danielle finally start to target him just as he's about to win, which is a fun aspect of this challenge, in that you could see who's about to win the challenge and sabotage them right before they finish, which is fun TV, though straight up is probably not the best strat gameplay wise, unless you're really thinking that person's going to target you, as obviously this is just alerting them to the fact that you don't want them to win, and through that pisses off the person who will have power to throw you in right before they make that decision. Again, it's not a great move, and we do obviously end up seeing Frankie winning the challenge here anyway, which in doing so means that Cody is safe here, as obviously he's not targeting Cody, which again, if the plan here was to try to get rid of Cody, then obviously they should have been trying to also stop Frankie in the process, though no one really did. Here we end up seeing Cody and Frankie strategizing on who to put in, with even them talking about throwing in the two biggest guys, which had this been OG Big Brother, obviously this would have been a pretty bad move here, to take out these two potential shields for you. Though in a game like Reindeer Games, where the challenges dictate everything, and even the players in the game seem to think physicality was going to matter down the road, I do think it's fully understandable why they would be in that mindset here. Though, funnily, as they were talking about this, we do end up seeing Nicole enter the room and join the conversation, and again, just acting as if she's 100% with them, which was humorous considering earlier in the episode we did see her talk about targeting Cody and Frankie. But again, this really just shows you the strength in Nicole's game, of her being extremely flexible and being able to play off of multiple sides. But right away, we end up seeing Frankie being 100% and wanting to throw in Cam as the easy pick here, though we do get a lot of debate on who the other person should be, even though it was pretty clear that he was going to end up picking X. And we do see Frankie doing some pretty active work here and trying to play it off as if he's not directly targeting either of them and just wants them in the showdown to take out the other person for him, which, and they really shouldn't believe, though it does seem like X does end up believing this down the road. And this is all while we do end up seeing Taylor campaigning for X here, again in a spot where this could have easily just blown up her spot, and like straight up, it actually doesn't really do so, where listening to Taylor's exit press, it does seem like she was actually always more loyal to Josh than Xavier, and Xavier was simply just an expendable number for her, to where, while obviously losing X at this point would have been very detrimental to her game, it actually wasn't as detrimental as you would expect it to be. Though again, I do think it is really bad here that we do see her campaigning against Cody to Frankie, with it just seeming like people just not realizing how close Cody and Frankie are, which is just insane to me, as and I feel like I would have really clocked this like right away, the fact that they must be close. But again, Taylor seems to not know how close they are, leading to her making this mistake here. And we also see Cam telling Cody that he thinks he's going to be up with him, which leads to Cody humorously telling him that he actually thinks he's safe, only for Cody to then proceed to lie to the women about how he's not close to Frankie, which all that was just kind of weird play there. But again, Cam and X get voted into Santa's Showdown, which takes place in this massive set of Santa's workshop. And along the way, we have the players coming in to get these like slow-mo shots of them as they come out, which obviously we've seen on recent like challenge seasons, Survivor seasons, though. And this really did show you the increased production value of this season for Big Brother season. I thought was an overall nice touch to the aesthetic of the show, though the challenge itself here ends up being probably the weakest point of the premiere here, with the challenge itself just being kind of boring to watch, for them having to recreate this design with these 7 pieces on it, which straight up did look pretty difficult. While I do think this is a somewhat equitable comp, it did seem like it was pretty exhausting to just constantly be running around and moving these pieces around, where I think at the end of the day it probably did still favor someone physical, at least to some degree, but still not that egregiously bad of a comp here. From an equability standpoint, Cameron just really ends up struggling here, where for some reason he decides to start in the middle of the puzzle, which is just a really dumb strategy. So our X has the lead the entire time. Go through this, we do get a bit of a funny little moment here of Caitlyn catching strays here, with Danielle just out of the blue saying that they're doing better in the challenge than Caitlyn did, which is a nice callback there, though again a funny random line to be included in the edit. But again, the challenge itself ends up being mostly mundane here, though we do end the episode obviously with Cam being eliminated, to where he gets to choose a gift as he leaves, with one of them containing $5,000, but Cameron instead gets a year's subscription to a jelly club. And scaringly, we do see him leave by saying "Daddy's coming home," which I really did not need to hear him ever say that. But with that, again, we do lose Cameron here, which again I was pretty okay with losing Cameron in episode 1. Again, he was the person that I was probably the most upset at the fact that he was on this cast, where I really just did not need to see him again, especially so soon after BB25. And straight up, I don't really feel like he brought much to this season. Now, to be fair to him, I do feel like he had pretty much no chance coming into this season, where really for me, like gameplay wise, this doesn't really change my opinion on Cam. To be fair, I was very low on Cam to begin with. Again, he had this instant perception of him being a rookie, and he seemingly ends up getting thrown into the first showdown without doing much really wrong, outside of just being looked at as this big physical threat from his previous season. But also, I'm perfectly fine with him being the first boot. Again, I feel like it was the perfect way for him to go out here so that we just don't really have to see him again. So again, I think I had enough of Cameron on BB25, where I didn't really want to see him have that big of a role in the season, especially over these other people that we haven't seen in a longer period of time. Now for episode 2, another strong episode that continues the storylines we saw previously of Cody and Frankie still being targeted here, which ends up setting up the main events of the episode, though also here we do end up seeing Danielle being well positioned within the majority, with her having the 4-person alliance we saw in the previous episode, though also having Brittany by her side, and just in general the women collectively working together as well. It really puts her right in the center of everything, which was nice to see, even though it doesn't last here. But here we also get a lot of focus on Frankie as well, and him trying to pull Xavier back in and making a deal with him to keep each other safe. That doesn't really lead to anything, which makes you wonder why this was so focused on here. And like strip, I don't even feel like it was their optimal move to even go through with this deal, considering how they're each other's biggest threats down the road anyway. Which again is the strange aspect of the strategy in reindeer games, as there are points where social positioning simply just doesn't really matter much, which makes it tough to really assess decisions made along the way. But either way, we get to the naughty and nice challenge, with Jordan sadly returning, but it ends up being another equitable comp, having to notice which holiday song from a list is missing within the lodge, with it. He said that this advantage is a game changer, clearly trying to get people to actually try in the challenge after the last naughty and nice challenge ended up being a bad one to win for your game. Though here we do end up seeing X and Taylor throwing it anyway. And to be fair, this was a more powerful advantage, with the winner of it getting to pick the teams for the Jingle Bell Brawl, though considering that ends up being a really equitable comp, it really doesn't end up being that big of an advantage. But we do get a lot of talk from Frankie and Cody about how they have to win it, and what do you know, Cody wins the challenge here, and what was straight up a pretty boring challenge, where we do end up wasting a lot of time just seeing people talking about crossing some songs off the list, which was just boring. And we do culminate it all with seeing some cranky carolers coming in to sing who weren't cranky at all, so that was boring. But with Cody winning the power, we do see Taylor seemingly knowing that she's going to get the disadvantage here and is going to be his target, only for it to be a 4v4 challenge where Cody is picking the teams. And I do feel like there are a number of ways to approach this team pick here, and I do think if you're really going to fault Cody for how he played on this season, this would probably be the choice that you would criticize him for. Though again, I do feel like this is a pretty complex decision here. There's simply just so many different ways you could take this, and considering how BB challenges are typically in the modern day, and how the last Jingle Bell Brawl, even though it had a social component to it, is still a somewhat physical challenge, I don't think it was the worst move in the world for Cody here to pick the most physical team possible, and just make a team to try to win the challenge, as at that point, you'll be safe anyway, as really obviously that's the ultimate way of guaranteeing your safety. Now, obviously, you can criticize the strategy that he utilizes here, in that if he loses, he's pretty much guaranteed to go into the showdown against what are the toughest challengers, and what will be against now his toughest competition, but also again him going against his allies as well. But really, again, like, allies in this game aren't as integral as they are in OG Big Brother, to where, well, it is definitely better off that you keep it in your allies in this game. It's not really game ending to lose one of them either. While the other complaint that he would be against the best competitors, it's like, at the end of the day, you have to beat them eventually anyway. And for someone like Cody in particular, who is, again, well known for being good at comps, I really don't feel like it's that big of a difference of having to face off against X or Frankie now instead of facing off against them later in the game. Though either way, again, I do feel like there are just major risks to be had with whatever decision you make here. I know people did want him to put Frankie on the other team, and then they would be able to save each other no matter which team lost, though straight up, that's just an unlikely situation to happen, where in that situation you would be banking on the other team that you've now declared as the people you don't want to be working with to agree to save you in the chance that they win, which I guess then you would want him to stack all of his allies on the other side. But the truth is that he simply just didn't have many allies at this point. I mean, really, Frankie's the only one that was undyingly loyal to him at this point in the game, and even then, considering the very limited amount of time that they have to make this ultimate decision, I really don't think there is a solid way of making this plan go through in a way that would actually keep Cody safe. To again, just straight up, there's just so many risks involved with this choice, no matter what you choose, to where I think if I was in this position, I would go for the more obvious path here that Cody does do here in trying to build the strongest team, even though it doesn't end up working out for him here. But again, we do end up seeing a lot of jockeying to get on Cody's team, as the opposing team will again also get a disadvantage in the Jingle Bell Brawl, which again plays into this notion that I think no matter what, if he had lost this challenge, he was always going in anyway, as this further demonizes him to the people he puts on the other team. Though again, like, in general, it was just kind of assumed that Cody's team would end up winning here, and we do end up seeing Cody instantly wanting Frankie and X on his team, to where really it was just a debate for who the fourth person was going to be, to where we do get some pretty good content here from Danielle Reyes, literally begging him to pick her, along with Brittany also using Derek's line of taking away food from her kid's mouth against him in this instance. We also see him telling Josh that he isn't going to pick him, as he doesn't want an all-guys team, which he pretty much openly says that he doesn't want to do for optic reasons, as yes, it would not look great. So obviously, knowing Cody as a player, knowing really just his basic strategy in Big Brother, I mean, that's obviously the way he would typically go. But through this episode, I will say I did really love Josh's DRs, where in this instance they do come off very old school, and how they felt largely unscripted and felt like him just openly airing his frustrations. We even get this shot of like him laying down in the chair, which felt like something you would do back in the day of like BB3, to where again I felt like that was overall a nice touch here. But yet it does narrow down this choice to Nicole or Taylor, with it being pretty clear he was leaning more so towards Nicole, with his DR about picking Taylor feeling pretty half-assed. While he does talk about picking Nicole would be a way to rebuild trust with her, and it will keep her safe, which again, considering how he was going all in on having to win this challenge, it did seem like this thought of keeping Nicole safe was more important to him than picking Taylor to beat in the case that he loses, which, to be fair, wouldn't have worked out for him anyway, considering what we learned of the later format. But here we do end up getting some pretty fun dodo moments for Cody along the way, with X using the term cerebral and Cody not knowing what that means. Also, we have him struggling to say Jingle Bell Brawl. That leads to us seeing each of his takes over and over again, and the cast eventually cheering when he finally gets it. But here he does end up picking Nicole first, which takes all the suspense away from his other choices, as we already knew who he was going with there. But this does lead to a bit of underdog content here for the people that weren't in Cody's team, with Danielle talking about how they're misfits, and Josh yelling at Santa for playing him and begging him to help him in the DR, which was funny. But this over-the-top nature of their content here made it really clear that they were going to end up winning this. But eventually we get to the Jingle Bell Brawl, which again ends up being a mostly equitable comp here, a modification of a challenge that we've seen in OG Big Brother, where they had to balance ornaments on a tree. That's essentially this puzzle of having to figure out all the weights of the ornaments. But again, this is played in teams, where each team member will have to solve one of the puzzles, which again, the puzzle itself is one that anyone anyone can figure out, though to be fair, I mean, wingspan does play a bit of a difference here in getting the ornaments to actually stay balanced when you're putting them on, though again, it didn't really play a major aspect into this, so where again, it was a mostly equal comp. But again, the underdog team does end up having a disadvantage here as well, with Cody end up having to pick a person specifically to give the disadvantage to, with him picking Taylor, which again makes sense from the story perspective, though I will say game-wise this did feel misguided considering how Brittany had obviously previously given him the disadvantage, so where again that felt like an easy out, while giving it to Taylor here just alerts Taylor to the fact that you know that she's coming after you, and also, I mean, Taylor's probably more competent in doing the task required of the disadvantage, to where, and probably just not an optimal move all around, though it didn't really matter at all. And the disadvantage here has Taylor having to perform a task of having to put ornaments on a tree that she doesn't have the balance at all, which again was just such a minor time sink to where it didn't really matter. And we see Taylor finishing right away, so again, mostly pointless. And we obviously end up seeing her team really just blow away the other team, with Nicole and X really struggling on their puzzles, to where Taylor's team ends up winning before Frankie even finishes the third puzzle, leading to a fun reaction from them, and us getting to see this like great slow-mo shot of Taylor as she does a somersault through the fake snow, really taking use of the cool presentation style that Reindeer Games ends up being able to provide. But through this, the winning team also ends up getting a power here as well, in that they're able to save one member of the losing team, where the other three will then go into Shanta's showdown, which again, I would have preferred it to at least keep to the 1v1 aspect of the showdowns, to just keep the format consistent, though again, not really a major complaint here. But again, knowing this format, I do feel like this kind of justifies Cody's decision to not split himself and Frankie up, as again, like considering the fact that only one person gets saved here and that it needed to be a team consensus choice, it did feel like it was very unlikely that Cody would have ever been saved. Though here, obviously the move is to save Nicole, especially if you do want to get rid of Cody, and considering the fact that only one person is going home here, obviously sending in Xavier and Frankie is the most likely way to get Cody out. And straight up, Cody doesn't end up even trying to save himself here, which I do think is an interesting aspect of his run on this season, where Cody clearly does not seem to have the drive that he once did in playing games like this, to where I do genuinely feel like he just doesn't have the gusto he once had in BB22, which I mean, he talked about himself, and many people seem to take that as him kind of being a sore loser and him just trying to not admit to the mistakes he made, but I do actually believe it. I do feel like you can very much tell his apprehension in playing the game in this very overt way in the games that he's played after BB22. But the main suspense here seems to come from X expecting his allies here to end up saving him, considering his alliance makes up the majority of the winning team, which does give this interesting insight on X as a player as well, where this is pretty much what he did on BB23 and relying on some of the more influential members of the cookout into doing some work for him in order to save him in instances that he could have very much been in danger, and putting blind faith in them, which obviously worked to his favor there due to the cookout having this outside mission that kept them faithful. But I do feel like seeing him put that same trust in this alliance here just further proves what I thought of X coming out of that season, and that he'd probably just do a similar thing on most appearances, to where again in most instances it'd simply just not work out for him, considering how there's obviously less incentive for this alliance to be sticking together, and for him to be blindly loyal to this group, and him clearly being used by this alliance as a weapon for them, being used to take out the more physical members of the opposition, and being mostly expendable to the people actually in charge here. Again, to me, it wasn't really a great look for him gameplay wise on this season, then being one of the few players on this season that ended up really dropping in my estimations through seeing his appearance here. But again, the winning team ends up picking to save Nicole here, again continuing this trend of sending the men into elimination, which again was a nice change of pace here, seeing another strong guy having to go home early, and again another challenge that is mostly equitable. I mean, there is a lot of running around that, to be fair, does favor physicality, but it is mostly essentially just a logic puzzle of you having to solve riddles to find out what toys each kid wants, which is completely in X's wheelhouse here, where we see him easily winning this. Though a strange aspect of this challenge is how everyone has the same answers, which means that you can essentially just copy off each other, and again, considering the first two here to finish end up moving on, it probably makes the optimal strat here too. Just follow the leader here, and we do see Frankie essentially doing that with X and copying some of X's answers, to where it does lead to him narrowly beating Cody, who again was also pretty close here. Probably would have won had that not been allowed, but clearly Cody was going to lose this just based on the editing of the season up to this point, to where it never really felt like he was set up for that deep of a run. And also just straight up, you could tell that Cody was kind of sad in the DR during the challenge, which made it pretty clear he was going to lose here. here. But again, with that, we do end up losing Cody, who straight up, again, I thought he was actually decent TV on this season, which is shocking to me, considering, again, Cody I find to be one of the more boring major characters in Big Brother history. I mean, while obviously I think he is a very good player, again, I will stand by that, despite people's criticisms of him. I do think as a character, again, he is just not good TV. He is someone that, again, is at least trying to make good TV, but he just doesn't really on either of his seasons. Though, again, I think on Reindeer Games here, when he's playing from the bottom, I actually thought he made for decent TV. Again, I think it was interesting to see him not being in this dominating position, and mixing down the fact that he, again, had the confessional, making fun of Nicole's voice, and just in general seemingly having more fun in the DR and making fun of himself. I felt like overall, again, I thought this was a good appearance from Cody. Straight up, I don't feel like I needed to see him ever again on reality television. I do feel like this run on this season here was at least kind of interesting to see. Well, with that, we move on to episode 3, which ends up being the strongest episode of the season, and really just one of the best reality TV episodes of the year. One that really feels like the peak of what the show had to offer. As straight up, the level of quality of this doesn't really stick beyond this. This episode in itself was, again, really hyped coming into this episode, where the cast were mentioning online that this would go down as one of the best episodes in Big Brother history, and obviously it was very, very good. Though, I do think those statements in themselves did feel kind of spoilery. Sort of twists and turns of this episode did feel a bit more predictable due to that knowledge. So while I thought the episode was very, very good, I do think I came out of it maybe a tinge disappointed, just because I kind of saw a lot of what happened here coming. With a major example of why being that we start off the episode with us getting to see a lot of the X and Danielle relationship. But they're clearly doing the exact same thing Taylor is doing with X and trying to utilize him as a weapon, though is doing so probably a bit too blatantly here, and what ends up being a bit of a sloppy play from Danielle, with the others seeming to pick up on this, with Brittany in particular talking about not trusting her now, which, again, I wonder if that'll be relevant later in the episode. Where really from this point on, I was pretty convinced that Danielle was going to end up going home in this episode. But really, this is kind of a typical trope of reality shows, to have this early scene to explain why the eliminated player eventually goes home, but then not really mention it again until towards the end of the episode. With this kind of feeling like a prime example of that, while also it felt like a result that was worthy of this big claim of this being the best episode in Big Brother history. But following that, we do end up getting a scene showcasing the Nicole and Taylor relationship, with them agreeing to not put each other into jeopardy, which I wonder if that'll be relevant in a later episode. But this obviously feels like foreshadowing as well to the fact that they are going to eventually make it to the end together, with them even talking about how getting to the end together is their best chance at winning here. But eventually we do get the next elf ambassador entering the house, that being Derek X, who felt like a godsend in comparison to Jordan, with him having a really fun energy in his batch of episodes here. But it does lead to the Naughty and Nice challenge, which revolves around a Christmas crooner who just got dumped and sings a song about his ex, I guess. And filling out that quota for the episode. But the challenge here ends up being another mental one of finding letters around the house and unscrambling them to figure out why he was dumped. And straight up, the challenge was just not particularly interesting, though finally they end up being told the advantage from the start, and that you get a 2-minute head start in the Jingle Bell Brawl. Again, seemingly done because they were worried that everyone was going to throw it once again. So again, they try to make this seem like a big deal. Or again, a 2-minute head start does seem like a big deal until you see the challenge and realize it's not. But also here we do strange to get the setup of this Brittany, Nicole, Frankie alliance that seemingly comes out of nowhere in the show here, where, I mean, obviously we had seen Brittany and Nicole working together, but we never saw Brittany's connection to Frankie. So the fact that they were working together at this point and in lockstep for the next few rounds just felt kind of abrupt. But obviously they're in opposition to the other 4-person alliance, which leads to this kind of split house dynamic, which is kind of interesting to see. Though obviously there was connective tissue between the two sides, with the women working together, and just in general the dynamics were a lot more complex than that, but still a really interesting strategic layout for this game here. But with that, we do end up seeing them work together in these groups during this challenge, though Taylor is the first person to figure this out and ends up winning the power, which, who would have guessed, it ends up being pointless. Though we do get some intrigue from Taylor targeting Frankie here, though doesn't want to expose herself by giving it to him, and through that instead has both Josh and X volunteering to get the disadvantage for some reason. All while Overall, we do end up seeing the women talk about feeling safe with her, with Brittany and Danielle, saying that she's a girl's girl. That felt like a full circle moment there. But really, obviously, this shows Taylor being right in the middle of the house with no one really coming after her, which really ends up being a strong suit of her game on this season. But this leads up to the Jingle Bell Brawl, where we do get the appearance of Tiny Vito, essentially, and actually a more difficult version of it, to where not only do they have the stack pieces here, but you also have to form a puzzle within it as well, making it even harder, to where this challenge just seemed to go on for forever, and you could tell how much the players themselves hated doing this, though. Along with that, we do end up seeing Taylor's advantage here, obviously not matter much, along with Josh's disadvantage here, also not mattering much, as his disadvantage ends up being him not being able to look at his puzzle key for 5 minutes, which was pointless as they were literally given the pieces already fully formed, meaning that you could just see the design from the very beginning. But again, this ends up going on for well over an hour, with a lot of talk about how this is the worst challenge ever and how hard it is, where eventually Nicole ends up being the first to finish, and we get her freaking out and seeing everyone celebrate her win, only for it to turn out that her puzzle is wrong, which supposedly does end up happening twice during this challenge, despite us only seeing it once here, but eventually she does end up winning it for real. But this is where we do end up learning about this episode's format for the showdown, again about halfway into the episode, where we get this radically different format to really any other round on this season, again taking away from the consistency of the season, though at the same time this ends up being by far the most interesting showdown of the season, with it feeling like a game that you would see out of Squid Game more so than anything you would have seen from Big Brother beforehand, which again just ends up being great TV, where it really felt on paper that anyone could go home in this instance. So in this game, we do end up seeing Nicole now having to pick one player that will go into the showdown, where they will have a certain amount of time to complete the challenge, though if that person completes it, that person will then get to pick the next person that goes in, where they will then have to do the exact same challenge, but with a minute less on the clock, where the first to end up failing here ends up getting eliminated. Again, a really cool challenge that just has so many approaches that you can take to this game. Like really, I just think there's a lot of strategy here around when you want certain people going in, trying to guess who's going to pick who, to where while it might not seem ideal to throw your own allies in danger, this is also a situation where it might actually play off to your benefit here to go in early and get safety right away by completing the easier version of the challenge, especially from a meta perspective, where I mean there's no way production's going to allow for someone to fail in the first attempt here, as again they got to fill out the episode. So again, you would expect the first couple tries to have pretty lenient time limits here, but again this ends up being a pretty complex decision, with Nicole wanting to target Xavier here, but does recognize how this can be beneficial to send in Brittany and Frankie, and Frankie rightfully volunteers to go right away, with Brittany being really hesitant to go, particularly after seeing the challenge itself, which ends up being the return of the hamster wheel challenge, where we see them having to use a hamster wheel to navigate an ornament through a maze, which we do see Brittany being terrified of this challenge, which I don't even understand why. I mean, she says that she doesn't think she's going to be able to move the wheel, which really made no sense to me, and we do see Nicole like confirming her fears to her, despite the fact that Nicole should know that that's stupid, as she literally participated in a version of this challenge back in BB22 and came in second to Cody. So again, all this made no real sense to me. But first we do end up seeing Frankie go in, during which we do see the others returning to the house, not being able to watch the challenge itself, to where they continue to strategize, only to know the result by hearing either bells ring or an evil laugh, which was a fun way to handle all this. I mean, for us to continue to see the panic in the house and anticipation as they await their fate was really interesting to see, and it's probably the point where I'm the most remiss at the fact that we didn't get live feeds for this season, where this would have made glorious feeds here, especially as straight up, I mean, while the show was obviously great here, I think something taking away from it was the fact that we could obviously see the runtime of the episode, and through that we knew there wasn't that much suspense on these first few people going in. We basically knew that they were going to clear considering how much time was left in the episode, but here we do end up seeing Frankie finishing with 2.5 minutes left on the clock, to where he pretty easily moves on, though interestingly we do see Frankie then proceeding to pick X, which feels like a similar move to what happened in the first round, where he seemed to actually want X to go, but picked him here so he can at least pretend like he was trying to keep him around in the case that he stays, which doesn't seem to work on X, as X just kind of annoyed at him for doing this, especially after X told him to not put him in, which is also a bad strategy from X, as again, he should have been wanting to go in earlier to try to get his own safety. That's where really I feel like both Frankie and Xavier end up playing this pretty poorly, as obviously the optimal move for Frankie here is to want Brittany to go in, where in doing so obviously you'll keep your entire side of the house safe and also allow you to put in X the following round, which will give him less time, and through that also essentially doom him here, as again, based on the time that we do later see, he would have been eliminated in that spot. Though it does seem like something really stopping Brittany from being picked here is the fact that Brittany herself doesn't want to be picked, which is also really bad from Brittany. As again, also in the fact that Xavier is going in now, if Xavier wins the challenge, the most likely person he's going to pick for the following round is going to be Brittany, which means that she's essentially almost guaranteeing that she's still probably going to go in, but with a lesser time. Though I will say, to be fair, Brittany did come up with an alternative plan here instead of putting in Xavier, to where she instead wanted to put in Danielle, which I mean, I will say, I don't think it's a particularly great plan, as while, again, it can be good in the sense that Danielle is someone that will probably never pick Brittany, I think as a whole, this is a mostly misguided play, especially considering she later ends up actually being the one to doom Danielle in the game, being a just outright bad move, one that really just shows a misread from Brittany and her thinking that Danielle wasn't loyal to her, when everything we've seen from Danielle is the fact that she actually was loyal to Brittany, which, I mean, to be fair, is also bad from Danielle's perspective for her to not even be able to keep someone that she is undyingly loyal to on her side, but considering how Danielle was probably, but also considering the fact that Danielle was probably one of the easier people to beat for down the road, I just feel like all around this was a pretty bad move from Brittany's point of view. But X obviously gets through this round, though surprisingly ends up doing so with only 14 seconds left, which again does end up convincing the others that whoever's going in next is pretty much going home. When in reality, it was just that X sucked at this challenge. But again, obviously the choice for him here is Brittany, with there not really being another decent option for him. We do see Brittany begging him not to put her into the challenge, feeling very remiss of something we would see in a double eviction, of someone just being extremely desperate with very little time to do much convincing here. And mixing that with the fact that we also see Nicole begging for her as well, it did lead to being a pretty fun segment, though she gets put in anyway, to where we see her instantly being pissed and storming to the backyard, and we even see Danielle getting emotional here and saying that she probably not coming back. And with that, and also the fact that Danny talked about how she doesn't think she'll get through this round, and also the fact that there's a good chunk of time left in the episode. Again, it should have been pretty obvious how this was all going to play out, but here we do see various reactions to Brittany going in, with, again, most people seeming to look at it as a foregone conclusion that she's going to fail here, with Nicole crying over her just not being in a good headspace, while Taylor and Josh end up celebrating that they're safe, only for Brittany to actually do extremely well here, actually finishing with the fastest time of the bunch, which obviously is used as this moment of her wanting to inspire her kids, though it also ends up just being an outright fun moment with her freaking out in disbelief as she nears the finish. And when she does finish, we also get her getting on the ground sobbing, saying that she loves her kids so much, all while following that up with saying that she hates all of them inside the house and that they sent her to her death, which was all this really funny content for Brittany there. But now Brittany has the ultimate decision of who to put in next. Again, in a position where the next person to go in will very likely not come back, though again, not technically a guarantee, considering Brittany did finish in a time that would have been good enough to survive the following round. Though here we do interestingly see Taylor volunteering to go in, which obviously seemed very risky here. Now, not necessarily the worst possible move, as if the next person to go in does survive, I mean, you're pretty much screwed at that point, where there's almost no way you're getting through the challenge. To put fate in your own hands, I do understand the decision here and wanting to go in, though we'll really never know how it would have worked out for her, as instead here, despite the fact that we're beyond the point where Brittany would be somewhat incentivized to put Danielle in as a way to put someone in that won't pick her, we still have Brittany wanting to go for Danielle here, which again just seemed like an all-around bad move, especially considering Taylor had already volunteered to go in. You would have gotten no blood on your hands by picking Taylor, and also even if you were really wanting to get rid of Danielle, if Taylor succeeds, she's probably throwing in Danielle anyway. And just straight up, Taylor was probably the optimal target for Brittany either way in this position, considering the fact that she had to deal with Josh as well. Where really, again, I just feel like this decision was all bad, though it does end up being spurred by by Nicole telling Brittany that Danielle has been ratting information to X, with Brittany confronting X about this, to which X ends up strangely acting out of character here and him finally just divulging information and that he wants to keep Danny safe, where again, this is X doing this, who's known for keeping his cards too close to his chest, to his detriment. So the fact that in this one instance, he's finally very loose about information, that information ends up leading to the target on Danielle's back getting even larger, was pretty funny to me. But again, Danielle ends up getting blindsided here, and like Brittany, ends up having a defeatist attitude going into it. And considering the foreshadowing and the very limited amount of time left in the episode, it did feel pretty clear that she was a goner, which again did take a bit away from this episode for me, though obviously it was strong with pretty much everything outside that. And here it did initially seem like a disaster for Danielle, with her wasting a lot of time just trying to figure out how to move the wheel in a position where that lost time potentially ends up costing her here, as she does get extremely close to finishing, but does ultimately fail. Where, considering the fact that this was an earlier exit for her, I actually feel like this was the perfect way for Danielle to go out here, being in this position where pretty much everyone is sobbing as she leaves, and we do get X and Taylor being able to talk about the impact that Danielle had on them during their runs on the show, and we see X being distraught at the fact that he wasn't able to protect her, and we get her essentially just being sniped out of the game here in a very wonky format, to where mixing down the fact that we see her opening a present, being the one to get the $5,000. Again, I just felt like all around this was just such a satisfying way to see her go out if she was going to go out. So I think that kind of made this ending a bit better for me. But with that, we obviously lose Danielle, and again, if we were going to lose her, I feel like this was the best way to lose her. I mean, obviously, ideally, I would have liked to see her make it much further in the game. I feel like, to me, she would have been the perfect winner for this season, someone that was such a legend in Big Brother history, and obviously has such a great redemption story, to where had she won, this would have been a really great outcome for the season. But again, it was for naught, and considering it was for naught, I feel like her being taken out in this really big, explosive episode was the right way for her to go. And again, it was just so refreshing to finally see her back on TV. Again, seeing her really just not losing a step, still being able to play a villain in DR very well, and seeing her play mostly well on this season. Now, straight up again, I do think there's definitely the fault to be had in the fact that she was so overtly scheming in the game, and the fact that it did seem like her being too openly close to Xavier ended up costing her. But really, as a whole, I do feel like she still demonstrated a lot of game ability here and some pretty good relationship building, to where I do feel like she still comes out of this looking like a pretty good player. But now for episode 4, which ends up starting off week 2 of the show, which straight up was not as good as week 1, where again, those first 3 episodes were just so great, to the point where I don't feel like the second half of the season here really lives up to that. Now, it's not terrible. I mean, it is still mostly passable, though obviously there's a lot more focus on challenges and less of the social strategy aspects of the show, where straight up this ended up being more in line with what I was expecting from a show coming into it, though it's still better than the shows like The Challenge or Buddy Games, which obviously it took inspirations from. Though a large reason for that lesson quality could stem from the fact that we do get a decreased runtime for these final episodes, where we're all an hour long, and the extended length that the first 3 episodes had, where the first episode was 2 hours long and the next 2 were 90 minutes, which again allowed for more time to breathe and showcasing of social dynamics, to where instead here, these episodes ended up being extremely jam-packed, to where I do feel like they kind of lost some of the charm that the original episodes had. But either way, we ended up starting it all off with a lot of focus around the women here, with them re-solidifying, to where it did definitely feel like the edit was trying to portray them as the heroes of this story and as these underdogs, to where at this point I was pretty convinced that a woman was winning. And considering the edit of this episode in particular, I did feel like it became increasingly clear that Nicole was primed to win, where obviously Edgic in Big Brother is mostly a unique concept, considering obviously the show had never been pre-taped, and while you can get takeaways from how the show is edited, particularly in how production is thinking, you really can't predict the winner based on the story being told, as the winner isn't already decided. And here I did find it pretty interesting to try to figure out who the winner was going to be and try to guess how they would portray their winner if given the option to where for me, I did feel like Nicole's edit very much did scream out as winnery by this point, with us getting a lot of focus on her alliances and her relationships. Also, they end up showcasing her constantly being this underdog and her getting this personal content, talking about being a new mom. Also, us getting a lot of highlighting of her decision making, which made it pretty clear to me that they were setting her up for a winning trajectory. All while I feel like the other women's edits had holes in them, from Brittany's being shown to be making incorrect decisions at points and not having as much focus around her relationships, while Taylor simply didn't get much focus on her decision making, with her making a lot of moves moving forward that simply were not explained to the audience. And while early on I did think the likes of Frankie and Josh had pretty strong edits as well, I do feel like this was the episode that was the turning point for me that made me feel like we were more primed for a Nicole win. But eventually, DX comes back into the house for the start of the Naughty and Nice challenge, with this probably being the best performance from any of the Elf ambassadors on this season, with him really going ham, acting genuinely scared about the well-being of Jill Frost, as here he instantly declares that he has devastating news that the famous pop star Jill Frost has disappeared. For through this challenge, they end up having to find clues to determine which of the reindeer kidnapped Jill Frost, because I guess that's a thing reindeer do. But here we do see X instantly narrowed down to 2 options, but ends up taking the 50-50 shot, all while the opposing alliance does the more optimal strat here. Of once they're able to narrow it down to 3, we see them all utilizing different guesses here to essentially guarantee that one of them is going to win, all while the opposing alliance does the more optimal strat once they narrow it down to 3, and us seeing Frankie, Brittany, and Nicole all guessing different options, guaranteeing that one of them is going to win, all while we do get a decent amount of focus here on Josh, with him being the first to properly figure out the answer by getting all the clues, the Aussie falling short due to the opposing alliance's strategy, where Frankie ends up winning here instead, which is where we get the actual appearance of Jill Frost, where again DX fully shows how committed he is to the bit here, with her ending up blowing a kiss to him, only for DX to then pretend to pass out in that instance, which was really humorous to see. But with this win, we do see Frankie getting the power here to pick his partner in the following challenge, with him seeing this as an opportunity to take the opposite approach to what Cody did, and him not wanting to pair up with his allies in the worry that they'll end up in elimination together, with him deciding to not pick Nicole or Brittany, but decides to pick Taylor instead, as someone that he still thinks he can beat in a showdown, which is ironic considering his end to his season. And once again, despite this being a logical rationale, this actually ends up being a position where this could have easily backfired on him once we learn how wonky the format ends up being this round. But unbeknownst to him, in picking Taylor to work with him, he's actually locking up Taylor as someone that was actually coming for him in this round, and now forcing her to actually work with him for in a way that ends up kind of working in his favor there. But then we get to see the other 4 players not picked here get to choose who they want to pair up with within each other, which did lead to some interesting jockeying here, and us seeing the 2 different duos wanting to take different approaches, and us seeing Nicole and Brittany wanting to pair up together, all while X and Josh want to be separate, as they don't want to go to elimination together, to where, personally, again, I do think there's pros and cons to both. Again, this is another one of those decisions where I don't think there's a clear answer simply because they don't know the format. But here we end up seeing X and Josh really pushing hard to try to get their way, to where Nicole and Brittany end up relenting here. No, again, it's a position where it really wouldn't have mattered that much in the grand scheme of things, considering the later format, where no matter what, one person from each side was going in at this point. Anyway, we get to the Jingle Ball Brawl, which ends up being a mostly boring challenge here of them just having to do a cube puzzle on a sled, to where Frankie ends up getting to divvy out the disadvantage here in the fact that at any point in this challenge he's able to freeze a team for 45 seconds, which really didn't seem to matter here as Frankie and Taylor were pretty far ahead anyway, though it does lead to some dumb special effects and them trying to actually make it look like X and Nicole are actually frozen. But again, Frankie and Taylor end up easily winning here, to where instead of picking the team that goes in as they expected it to be, they instead have to pick one person from each team, with Frankie getting to pick from one team while Taylor gets to pick from the other, with them having to do a random draw to determine who gets to pick from each duo. A format here that is just so contrived to where there's just so much going on in this format, to where I actually feel like this actually lessens the drama of this episode, where again, through this being a spot where we have this very split house and now making these two have to make a decision on their own, it actually ends up lessening the potential of there being a move that backfires on them, where considering each pairing has one person from each duo, this should have made the choice extremely obvious for both involved here, giving them a pretty easy out, with Frankie being able to easily throw Josh in over Brittany. While Taylor actually ends up having a more difficult position here, where again you would think that she would just instantly save X as her closer ally, though she obviously does have a connection to Nicole as well, and obviously previously made a deal to keep her safe, which again I wonder if she's going to break that. And again, this ends up being a pretty complex decision for Taylor, where either way she's having to break a deal of one of the two, and I do think this is a spot where it is probably better to try to go deep with Nicole than it is with X. However, I do think you also need to factor in the fact that Josh is already in elimination, someone that is, again, Taylor's closest ally at this point, someone that she wants to save in the game. So if her attempt here is to try to save Josh, as she wanted to go to the end with him, putting in Nicole is obviously the better option, with Josh having a better chance at beating Nicole in a challenge, where I straight up don't know what the actual best option is here. Like, I do think I would have leaned towards putting X in, as if X survives, what other option does he have? I think that's the way I would have gone, though. Again, I think if I am Taylor, I probably would be wanting X to go here. But again, I can understand the rationale for wanting to keep X in the game, especially considering you still have Frankie in the game, and your plan is to like weaponize X to take out Frankie. Though really just as a whole, again, I think the decision here is just pretty marginal on which one's the better option, to where I still don't really know where I would have landed by the end of it. But obviously she ends up voting in Nicole, which does burn her relation with Nicole here, though to be fair, it ends up being repaired by the end of the next episode anyway. But it does lead to Nicole versus Josh in the Santa Showdown, and what ends up being a pretty intense endurance comp that I do feel like X would have won anyway. It's where, again, like with Taylor trying to save Josh here, I don't feel like it would have worked out no matter who she picked. And again, I think Nicole is the person that was more likely to lose this to Josh. But again, this challenge ends up going on for a while here, where they have to stand on this candy cane that's shaking around, where suspiciously the cane gets a lot more intense towards the end of it, which really makes it feel like the producers just wanted this challenge to end already. And we do get this shot at the end of both of them failing at the same time, with them pretending like, oh, we need to check the cameras to figure out who won, even though on the replay it was very clear that Josh was the first to fall here, giving Nicole a pretty impressive win here in a challenge that really did not favor her. And through that, we do end up losing Josh here, who I was sad to lose here. I mean, I do really like Josh. I do feel like Josh is someone that is a bit overhated by the general community, someone that most people find annoying, though again, I personally always loved Josh, and I did really like seeing this more mature, older Josh on this season, where again, like, he is still a bit of a ham at points, but I just found him to be really endearing in the DR, of him being, again, this still big ball of energy, but probably not being as frustrating to watch as he was on BB19, where on that season, again, it felt like he was kind of just following orders of other people for a lot of it, which made you think that he didn't really have a mind of his own until like the very end of the game. Yet here again, it feels like he was able to find that balance between being this big ball of energy and also still recognizing that this is a game and playing it like a game. And really just in general, like, I feel like Josh is someone that I actually genuinely like as a Big Brother player, and really just a player on any of these shows, where again, while people get upset at the fact that he's always on the challenge over and over and over again, I would love to see Josh on really any season of reality TV I watch, as again, I personally just find him to be a likable personality, and I feel like that got further emphasized on this season. Now for episode 5, the penultimate episode, where here we do learn that there's going to be 4 challenges for some reason, because obviously we needed 4 challenges in an hour-long episode. But here we do once again see the women getting together, with Taylor talking about having to do damage control with Nicole, to where despite their mishap in the previous round, we do see them instantly working back together here in targeting Frankie or X, as obviously they're incentivized to do so. But obviously that doesn't lead to much success in this episode. But eventually we get to the Naughty and Nice challenge, where Tiffany enters as the last elf ambassador, to where she was mostly just fine here. I mean, she was definitely better than Jordan, though I do feel like DX probably had more fun moments throughout his run. But here we do learn about Elfie Buble having locked himself away, and here we get a strange challenge of having to find the right key to open the door to release him, which Nicole ends up finding right away, winning the challenge here, to which we obviously get our typical performance from the fake Michael Bublé here, though this is where we do learn about this round's format, to where there will be 2 Jingle Bell Brawls for some reason, to which both will end up doling out safety, with the winners of both of those challenges ending up earning a spot in the Reindeer Games, obviously nullifying a lot of the social strategy aspects of this round, though Nicole does end up having a power here, and that she's able to choose one person that will sit out of the first challenge, now giving them only 2 chances to save themselves instead of 3. So that's something. But obviously she ends up picking X here as she's literally working with everyone else, so that wasn't a surprise. But with that, we get to our first Jingle Bell Brawl, it being a food tasting comp where they've done this in the past, and them having to drink a disgusting smoothie and have to guess which ingredient is inside of it, which obviously just seems disgusting. But again, it is another equitable comp here that does have some fun moments, from Nicole making puke noises the entire time, you just constantly hear in the background of pretty much every shot. We have Brittany picking tartar sauce for one of the rounds because it tastes like fish, which makes no sense, as why would you just not pick fish then? But she ends up performing pretty terribly in this challenge, though through that we also see Frankie have a pretty interesting strat here of getting one right just by looking at the color of the drink, being able to narrow down his options that way. But again, it did seem like it was going to be a relatively even challenge early on, outside of Brittany, who again gets no points, but Taylor really blows it away by the end, meaning that she's the only person this season to have never gone into a Santa showdown, really highlighting her social game there. And also here we end up getting a power of her own, with her having the ability now to save another player, taking that person to the Reindeer Games alongside her, being the only spot in the Final Four that wasn't earned through a competition. And instantly we do see Taylor being between Nicole and Brittany, keeping to her girls' alliance, which obviously makes a lot of sense there, as you would think that she would have a better shot at beating them at the end over X or Frankie. The final decision that she ends up making here ends up being one that is another questionable one, in that she ends up deciding to save Nicole here over Brittany. Obviously a choice that you can look at as something that maybe lost her the game, and the fact that she loses against Nicole at the end, though again, who knows how Brittany would have done. But again, it's not the choice that I personally would make. Now, I don't think it's necessarily the wrong choice, as really I just don't feel like there's that big of a difference between the two. I feel like Nicole and Brittany have very similar pros and cons, having very similar comp stats, to where while I do personally feel like Nicole is probably the one I would have more faith in competitions, and it did seem like Taylor did as well, with her saying that she actually wanted to keep Nicole around in the game due to her needing her to beat X in the final round, which does end up happening. But again, I just don't know if that's the approach that I personally would have taken, where I do think I would have taken Brittany, who was the lesser comp competitor, in that way obviously guaranteeing a weaker person at the end, and still having the chance of Nicole taking out X or Frankie right now instead of in the final, which, I mean, to be fair, is pretty much exactly what she does, though swaps it out and has Brittany in that position instead. Though again, I do personally feel like Brittany was probably less likely to win challenges here, but again, I don't feel like it's a major difference to where it doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme of things. But this does bring us to our second Jingle Bell Brawl, which is essentially a basic quiz comp about the previous musical performances, which again, at least they had some purpose to them. But here it was funny to see X just completely bomb here, not having paid attention to anything, to where it is pretty close between Frankie and Brittany, but Frankie pulls it out here, having a pretty funny reaction to this, where we see him crying and declaring that he loves Christmas and this is his best Christmas and he's had really good Christmases, which is again the most Frankie humble brag I've ever heard. But it leads to us having X versus Brittany in the Santa showdown, with this being X's 4th showdown, meaning that he was literally in all but one of them, while Brittany is once again coming into this pretty defeated, as you could tell in the DR that she just got finished crying, to where that was probably a sign that she wasn't making it through here. And really that was even more obvious when we see the challenge itself, which ends up being an extremely physical one, being the first and pretty much only fully inequitable comp here of the season, being one where you have to climb up a zip line and knock down these puzzle pieces while on the zip line, with the pieces themselves being pretty far away, giving X a massive advantage considering his height, while Brittany struggles to even touch them. Though while we do see X get a massive lead as expected, he seemingly does struggle with finding the right puzzle pieces, to where we do see Brittany catching up after getting advice from the other players, which I'm pretty sure she was not allowed to get, but it does at least give her a fighting chance here, only for X to win anyway. And through that we obviously lose Brittany, who really just showed on this season that she really hasn't lost a step. Again, she is still incredible TV, having fantastic DRs, still having funny moments in the house, where she's just simply one of the best characters in Big Brother history, and really just further supported that on this season. While also from a social strategy aspect, she seemed to be doing okay early on. I will say, I do think by the time of round 3, it did seem like she got a bit paranoid and probably made some suboptimal moves, but still, I think showed once again that she's a very good social player, that she definitely has strengths to her game. While as a comp look better. I mean, again, I don't think she's the greatest on this season, but she still at least had that win in episode 3 that I think is a massive highlight there, and is definitely not a slouch in competitions where she wouldn't have a shot in most instances, to where, again, like, I think Brittany really showed on this season that she still has it, to where, again, if only this was a real Big Brother season, we could see it being truly tested. But I do feel like I come out of this having a better sense of her as a player, with me being a bit more resolute in my opinions that I had coming into it. But with that, we then get to the finale, which was, again, just all challenges, where there was really only one true strategic decision here, and that was even rushed through, to where, again, not much of substance really happens this episode, but it's still a passable finale with an interesting conclusion. But we just start off with Nicole really setting up her underdog run, and her talking about wanting to show her son that she can do anything, and this felt like a very clear setup to her eventual win, all while Taylor's confessional during this segment felt very surface level in comparison, and talking about how she needs to get the money like she always does, which again didn't really make it feel like the show made you want to root for her in this instance, making the outcome feel pretty apparent to me. But we still do get a naughty and nice challenge here, a challenge used to essentially determine the matchups for the Reindeer Games, which ends up being a tournament style format here and having 2 1v1 matchups leading up to a final match, which I will say, I don't know why any of the lead up to the final match was considered the Reindeer Games, where those just felt like a glorified set of Santa showdowns, with the final round being the only one that was formatted differently, to where I feel like that in itself could have just been the Reindeer Games, but I guess they just wanted to make the entire finale the Reindeer Games, even though none of it felt like it flowed well together. But either way, the Naughty and Nice challenge here has them trying to find which painting in the house was replaced, with Xavier, despite not having studied the musical performances, I guess did study all the paintings in the house for whatever reason, leading to him winning this challenge right away, to where we get, again, a really rushed sequence here of his decision making on who he's going to face off against, in which he ends up picking Nicole, saying that he wants to face off against Taylor at the end. Now we do obviously see him consider taking Frankie on here instead of potentially on the final, though he obviously doesn't go through with that, and to be honest, it probably wouldn't have changed much anyway. But something I did find very strange about this is that despite X's win here, him and Nicole actually have to do their challenge first. And also, even beyond that, I really didn't like how the 2 challenges used in the semifinal round here were radically different, where I get it from a TV standpoint, not wanting to do the same challenge twice, though it did seem like the challenges here were kind of divvied out randomly, to where I wish there was a bit more agency on X's part, where he could have had the choice of picking which challenge he wants to be a part of, as if this was always the setup for the challenge, then that the Naughty and Nice winner would have to participate in the one that they do here, then he would have just been better off not winning that challenge, as he had better odds winning the other challenge. So again, I didn't particularly love that randomness to it, but here we do end up seeing the X versus Nicole matchup, in which they have to solve a gear puzzle, which we've seen on the main show in the past, to where X is also given a 30-second lead here. That doesn't end up mattering, as he just sucks at the puzzle, finally doing the same thing that Cam did in the first showdown of starting the puzzle in the middle for whatever reason. Again, a terrible strategy, and funny to see him make the same mistake that actually led to him surviving that first round to begin with. But again, Nicole ends up winning this here, giving us a big reaction from her for yelling out "holy crap," and just in general felt like a very satisfying narrative moment here of Nicole taking out X, essentially this David versus Goliath sort of result. But that leads into the Frankie versus Taylor matchup, which also ends up culminating in a pretty fun narrative moment, where the challenge itself ends up being a slingshot challenge, where they have to knock down specific targets based on riddles they have to listen to, which was extremely close the entire time, though Frankie has the lead coming into the end, needing just one more shot, only for him to miss and have to start all over, leading to Taylor winning the challenge instead. And a great culmination to the Frankie-Taylor rivalry, and Taylor being the one to take him out here after all of her talk about targeting him. But beyond that, also allows us to have this all-women final too. Again, a really refreshing thing to see here, considering what just happened on BB25 with all the comps being dominated by the men, where it really just shows you how balanced things can get if you have equitable comps here. But before the final, we do see the eliminated players coming back for some reason, where they don't really do anything here outside of just watch the final matchup, and I felt like that was kind of a wasted opportunity. Again, I think I would have liked there to be at least some sort of jury vote aspect, where maybe the winner of the jury vote gets an advantage of some sort, but again, they're really just here to watch and give DRs about what's going on. But here we do get the reveal to them of who got eliminated, with there being this massive shock at seeing X and Frankie come out, with Cam in particular being shocked. which I wonder why. But then we get to the final, which ends up being a 3-part challenge, again, making it seem somewhat worth it being the final challenge that determines the winner, where this ends up being a mix mash of challenges we've seen in the past. First having to stack a tower using these foam pieces and jump to grab a mistletoe. Then they have to do a maze puzzle, interestingly in the shape of a tower that had moving pieces within that as well. Feeling like a pretty interesting puzzle here, even though it didn't really make for the greatest TV. But the final part ends up being a stacking comp, similar to the ones we've seen on the main show. But the pieces here are in the form of snowflakes, and this challenge just in general ends up playing out pretty well here, in that we do get Taylor having a pretty big lead at the beginning, and really just for the majority of it, getting out of the first part really early to where Nicole ends up struggling there, which I will say that part in particular did feel very inequitable, especially in comparison to the other two, where Taylor's height definitely helped her with the jump at the end, while Nicole ends up struggling with that. But again, it all comes down to the stacking portion, where both really struggle here, and it really did feel like this took a while to complete, though by the end, Nicole ends up passing Taylor right before the end and ends up winning. Again, a fun result here, one that felt pretty predictable through the edit, though was a pretty big underdog win for Nicole, who is again behind for most of the challenge, and also just again has a fun story in how she wins this season. And again, I think really just shocking most people, and the fact that who really thought Nicole Franzel would win a game entirely around challenges. So again, I think she just has a great story for winning this season, and it makes me out of the fact that, again, this kind of adds to her Big Brother legacy with, again, her claiming she's a 2-time winner, even though, again, I would rebut that. But still, obviously has now shown her style of strategy, allowing her to navigate through the game once again. Again, I do think this is overall a really great look for Nicole here in her win here. It ends up being a really interesting outcome to the season for me. But with that is the entire season. But before we wrap up the video, I do want to talk about the finalists, talking about them in the order they were eliminated. So let's start off with Xavier. And again, for me, Xavier was a bit of a tough person to assess in this season. I do feel like Xavier's probably the person that, in my opinion, of their overall social strategy ability went down. But to be fair, they were also the person that probably had the most room to maneuver. As again, like obviously the criticism of Xavier's game is how much reliant he was on the cookout, something that was very improbable to happen on many other seasons, and literally think that couldn't even really happen until his specific season, where again, I feel like Xavier on most given seasons is probably not the greatest player. I feel like he's one that, again, probably makes it halfway through the game, but then I think at that point becomes a massive target and gets taken out, as we almost saw in BB23. And I feel like seeing him on Reindeer Games here and seeing how kind of aloof he was to the strategy at points, and how blindly loyal he was to his alliance, I feel like this just further cemented my downsides on Xavier as a player. Now, again, I still think as a whole, Xavier still definitely has strong suits. Obviously, he's still very good at competitions. He does have a killer instinct to a degree, where if he really feels like he needs to cut you, he would be willing to do so. But I do feel like as a whole, my opinion of his game did go down through his appearance. And also just entertainment-wise, I think he was probably the least entertaining person on this cast by the end of it. To where, I mean, Xavier's always had like a pretty fun personality. I mean, you listen to him in interviews, I feel like he does pop there. Though for some reason on the show itself, I don't feel like he's ever been that entertaining. And I feel like this kind of supported that. Next up, we're moving on to Frankie. And Frankie is someone that obviously coming into this season, most people didn't like him. People were upset that he was here. I was personally kind of interested in seeing how his run went here, and I feel like it went almost as well as it could have. I feel like he had a pretty good appearance here, having this mostly fun energy through the season. Again, while you can obviously criticize him for being a bit too hammy, I still think for the most part made for good TV, and mixing out the fact that, again, he just further proved how good he is at competitions in Big Brother. I feel like this is appearance here that, again, probably makes me go up a bit on Frankie, or I think it just further supports the game that he played on BB16 and makes me think that he could probably do the same thing again, where he just really feels like a well-rounded player, and one that also brings some decent TV as well, where, again, I think Frankie was a perfect casting choice for the season. Now for the runner-up in Taylor. And Taylor, for me, had an interesting run in the sense that this allowed me to further contextualize her game. I feel like Taylor's a player that, obviously, her first appearance was one that was very strange. It was one where she was instantly on the bottom, and through that had a very rocky trajectory through the game, though I do feel like on this season we got to see a bit more genuine of an appearance from Taylor, seeing her being able to play a bit more freely, and I think through that it kind of makes me fully grasp her as a player, probably making me think that, yeah, I don't know, she's the greatest strategically. Definitely does make some strategic missteps at points, though I do think she definitely is a very good social player, where we just see her being brilliantly positioned in this season, where no one was really coming for her for most of the season, and she had very loyal allies throughout the entire house, where really she worked with pretty much everybody but Cody and Cameron, who are the first two outs of this season, to where, again, I do think Taylor kind of cemented her game for me on this season. So while there's still definitely things to criticize, I do think as a whole, again, this does show her to be a pretty decent player, being the only person to never be sent down to elimination the entire season, and also just performing pretty decently in comps as well. Really just all around, I feel like this is a pretty good appearance from Taylor. But finally, let's talk about the winner, Nicole, who, again, as I mentioned, I feel like the edit was pretty apparent by the end that she was going to win. Obviously, she has a good underdog story, and the fact that she was someone that was, again, no one really expected to win, and really ends up blowing away everyone's expectations, even her own. And again, I think as a whole, she ends up performing pretty well in this season. Again, winning certain comps when she needs to, further supporting the fact that, again, she's pretty good at these non-overtly physical competitions, while beyond that, she also navigated through the game in a pretty decent way as well, where, again, she's just such an expert at managing her threat level, where she was saved from going into elimination multiple times. The one time she does go into eliminations, a spot where she's kind of screwed over by the formatting of that round. But again, we just see her once again be able to navigate her way to the end of a game for literally the third time now. To where, again, when we're looking at her track record on reality TV, it is pretty insane, to where her worst appearance is her first one, getting 7th place. And beyond that, she's gotten to the final 4 in all of her reality TV appearances, if we're including The Amazing Race. If we're not, then she's made to the final 3 and has won 2 of those appearances, to where, again, like, it is a pretty good track record there, to where I do feel like as a whole, like, my opinion of Nicole Franzel through this season has definitely gone up, both in terms of her as a reality TV presence, but also as a player as well, to where I do think when my ranking of every Big Brother player eventually comes out, you can probably expect her to be higher than what you're expecting, to where, you know, overall I felt like this is a great season for Nicole. But with that, again, that is the entirety of Big Brother Reindeer Games. Obviously a season that was way better than it had any right to be. Again, this was a throwaway holiday special made due to them having to fill out the schedule due to strikes, and despite that, it ends up being an actual great season of reality television, to where, while again the back half was not as strong as the first half, I do feel like as a whole it still ends up being a pretty solid product, with in those first 3 episodes in particular being a really great 3-episode stretch. Even beyond that, we had some great storylines across the season. We had a great cast, and again, this feels like the closest we're ever going to get to a Big Brother Legend season, where it really just elevated this season in my mind, where I really just enjoyed this ride the entire way through, probably enjoying it more than even BB25, which, I mean, to be fair, obviously that was inconsistent towards the back half of that season. But again, I just really enjoyed Reindeer Games, where somehow this ended up being one of my favorite reality TV seasons of 2023. But again, with that, those are my thoughts on Big Brother Reindeer Games. Now, moving forward, I mean, I still got my Forever UK review, which is going to come out, even though it's super late now. Also, I still have my ranking of every Big Brother player that is coming out in about a month's time, so you can stay tuned for that. But obviously I'll be back for the likes of BB Can 12 and BB 26 and Survivor and all the other stuff that goes on, so expect videos on those things. But for now, that is the video. Thank you for watching.